live on the land in a more humane way. Humane to each other and humane to other living things. The fact is, and that's something I learned growing up as a grandchild of the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma, we're all dependent upon ecosystems, and that dependency on ecosystems only becomes clear when it fails. So I've got a couple of tenets I want to go through. Everything is connected. I always start every presentation I ever make with these tenets. Everything is connected. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report was issued by the United Nations in 2005. Almost 1,600 scientists around the world spent 6 years assessing ecosystem services. Those are the things we get from the biosphere, that little thin layer of life that surrounds our planet, and evaluating their impact on our constituents of well-being. These are the things we fight and die for: freedom of choice and action, chief among them. And what their determination was, of course, is that all things that we fight and die for come from the land. And often the things we fight and die for is in fact the land. So supporting, provisioning, regulating, and cultural ecosystem services. This is a side. I had the opportunity, 7 years ago, under the George Bush administration, W. Bush administration, to participate in the Mideast peace process as a technical delegate. So I spent a week in Istanbul, Turkey, with Jordanians, Israelis, and Palestinian Authority representatives dealing with environmental issues. And I was there. I'm also the chair of the Environmental Protection Commission for the Cherokee Nation. I'm 8th generation Oklahoman on the Cherokee side. So I was there largely because of my connection with an understanding of this sort of the constraints of nations within nations and how that works in a potential framework for environmental management. And I was just amazed to learn that the chief export from the West Bank, Palestinian territory, is stone and gravel. This land that they're fighting and dying for, they're digging up and shipping away because it's all they've got left. So it was just amazed, but they will continue, and then those gravel pits, the mining pits, those holes in the ground now then become places for refuse, trash, and solid waste, and recyclables. It all goes in there, and then they burn that from time to time when the smell gets too high or the rats get too thick. So they burn those pits. And of course that creates air pollution on the Israeli side because this place is very tight, very close in. And so those are the sorts of conflicts that are driving this day-to-day irritation with each other. So it's an amazing thing just how interconnected these things are. So we think about culture, supporting nutrient cycling, soil formation, food, provisioning food, fresh water, food, fuel, fiber, feed, regulating climate regulation, flood regulation. Cultural services are really what we fight and die for on the land, too. Again, my ancestors were removed from North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia in 1835 at Bayonet Point and shipped to Oklahoma. And the reason we fought that for 100 years with weapons and ultimately with law, and we lost both, was because we won the law, but we didn't have the weapons to enforce the law, so we lost. So the reason my ancestors ended up in Oklahoma, they resisted that, was because they walked the lands of their fathers, their grandfathers, their mothers, their grandmothers. Those were the paths that their grandmothers walked, that their grandfathers walked. That connection to the land is everything. Now, just from an economic standpoint, what are the three most important things in real estate? It's an old adage that's just so true, right? If you don't believe me, try to buy a house around Wilson Park. It doesn't matter what the house looks like. So that's something that we often forget. It's part of our psyche. We understand everything's connected, then we behave like everything's not. So that's something we need to think about. And everything is changing, and that rate of change really is what we're going to talk about for the next 5 or 6 minutes. And this is, to the extent that I have any engagement with corporations in sustainability, this is what I focus on most. Understanding change, managing change, and creating a culture of adaptation, because most cultures are designed for stasis, to maintain the same thing, to maintain standard quality of production, standard practices of implementation of delivery of goods and services. They're not designed for change. The problem is you can't maintain the same when you've got changing environments. And of course we know part of the change is driven by population growth. I'm preaching to the choir. You all know this. What's happening here? Is this a Mel Gibson apocalypse? This is UN Population Bureau estimates. What's happening about 2100? It's not that far away, as we're well into the second decade of the 21st century. What's that?
Looks like we're stopping growing.
Yeah, populations, why would it stop growing? Why would global population start to decline somewhere, and this is a fuzzy area where this edge is? What's going to happen there?
Carrying capacity.
Carrying capacity, that's apocalyptic. That means we stop because we can't grow anymore. What do you say?
I said environmental apocalypse.
So you're both the same thing. It's, we reach some threshold where we just can't feed ourselves, or we can't, or we poison ourselves, something horrible happens. You know what the cause of this is? Human prosperity. Women become prosperous. And what happens when women become prosperous?
They could reproduce.
Don't have to have as many children.
They shop.
Fertility rate goes down. Fertility rate, not fertility level, not how many babies we can have. Fertility rate, the number of children a woman has in her lifetime, starts to decline as we become more prosperous. How many of you have more than 3 brothers and sisters? More than 3. No one in here has more than 3 brothers and sisters? Wow. How many, usually in a room this size, at least someone does. Duggars aren't here, but how many of you have more, how many of your parents have more than 3 brothers and sisters? How many of your grandparents have more than 3 brothers and sisters, right? What happened here? What happened here is we became more prosperous. We became less agrarian too, because that's the other reason we have lots of kids for a number of reasons. It's important to understand that, because as we're anticipating change, let's see, you're a bit of an economist, you're an accountant, but you have some economics background, Landon. How do you have an economy, a growing economy with a decreasing population? You can ask Tsar Putin that question too. You can't. Because demand for goods and services are linked to population at some level of prosperity. And as the population starts to decrease, demand for goods and services starts to decrease. What happens to economies when demands for goods and services start to decrease?
More vacations.
More vacations. Holidays. 17 weeks of holidays a year. If you want to live in Scandinavia, you wonder why they spend so much time not in Scandinavia, because they have so much holiday. What happens is an imploding economy. That's what happens, based upon our current model of economics. So we've got to figure out another way to have an economic system with decreasing demands for goods and services. But that's 100 years out. We get a long hill to climb before then. Let's talk about change too. I grew up in Oklahoma. My granddad was born in 1917. My granddad was born in a time of czars and emperors. When he was born, it was the normal state of humanity, with a few exceptions of explorations into democracy and other forms of government. It was the state of humanity to be ruled by a strong man, almost always a man. But it was the state of humanity to be ruled by a king, a czar, an emperor, some autocratic system, and usually dictatorial autocratic. That was just the way humanity was intended to be. God decreed it, or whoever, because for thousands of years that's the way it was. Then this event with a halftime interlude called World Wars I and II occurred, and in a period of really a 25-year period, brief blink of time, we entered the era of democracy, where things changed, and things changed fast. And we're in the midst of that change right now. The 20th century is the century of democratization of the planet, and it's still playing out. And the consequences of that are fully unpredictable. Look at Egypt. Look at what will happen in Saudi Arabia in the coming decade. Look what's happening in Russia as Ukraine tries to become more democratic, and then the pressures against change occur. So we're seeing this era of democracy playing out. Now, what's that mean for the era of our children and grandchildren? We don't know. My granddad was born in 1917. And when I was growing up in Oklahoma, I lived with my grandparents while I was getting my undergraduate at Oklahoma State, and they lived out on a farm. And so Saturday mornings in the fall, my granddad would get me out of bed at 5 o'clock every Saturday morning. I have no idea why 5, though I'm 51 and starting to understand it more and more. But he'd get me out of bed at 5 o'clock, and we'd go hop on the little Ford tractor and drive with a trailer and drive out in the woods, the wood patch to cut firewood, because that's how we heated the house. Really, it was just because Grandpa was bored. But also that's what we did. So we were sitting under having coffee one morning, sitting under an old dead elm tree that had been struck by lightning. And we looked up at the elm tree, and there was a fork in the tree. My granddad said, my grandfather taught me how to build or make an oxbow out of a fork in an elm tree like that. Elm's a very strong wood, and that fork is going to be very strong. You can make a great oxbow out of it. How many of you know what an oxbow is? Okay, most of you don't. An oxbow is a yoke that you put over an ox's neck so that a beast of burden can pull things. That's an oxbow. My grandfather was describing to me a 10,000-year-old human technology for harnessing power, for enhanced power, for sustenance, for prosperity. Then we went back for dinner that night, at about 5 o'clock, eating bologna sandwiches, and we watched the space shuttle take off. That was really cool, watching it, right? So my grandfather, and it struck me at that time, I'm prescient enough to understand, my grandfather has lived through that change from beast of burden, worked a team of mules as a kid, to the space age. Your son won't know what a space shuttle is, because we retired the last one 2 years ago. He won't know. And right now, if we want to go to the space station, who do we get to ride with? Yeah, but the rent's going up right now. So you see the challenge. So now let's talk about this, focusing on this population issue, because I'm fascinated by it. This is my mentor, Norman Borlaug. I have a perspective influenced by Norman Borlaug, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970, father of the Green Revolution. He said in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, we have only won a battle against hunger. Now he was given that Peace Prize because of the work he did as part of the second stage of the Marshall Plan after World War II in rebuilding modern agriculture in Asia and tried in Africa, it just didn't stick, it was too unstable at the time, Central and South America and the Pacific Rim, bringing modern agricultural technologies and improved seed types from local seeds. You didn't use U.S. seed types, they didn't work there, but from local seeds and local knowledge trying to improve production. He said, we have only won a battle against hunger. He was, at the time in the award, they said that he saved 2 billion lives from starvation in the 1960s. We had a series of famines in India and in Mexico, droughts in Mexico. 2 billion people probably would have died. The population of the planet was not that big at that time. That could have been catastrophic. It could have been a third to half of our population. It could have been catastrophic socially. So he was attributed he and a whole army of people were attributed for saving those lives. He said, we have only won a battle against hunger. The war against population rages on. At that point, this is 1970. 1970 was 44 years ago. He said at that point, the only solution to the population problem is to empower women. This was in 1970, to empower women. Now, projected rates right now, if we don't empower women, will put us at 12 billion by 2050. 2050 is 36 years from now. Your son will be 36 years old at that point. What's the world going to look like? Well, hopefully will be about 9.25 billion. We don't know because there's uncertainty. The reason there's uncertainty is because the children being born today are the ones who will be having the children in the next 2 generations that will determine the population of the planet then. So what we do in the next 10 years is going to determine where we're going to be at 2050 and then for the next 100 years. What we do right now matters. The Gates Foundation gets this. This is why they shifted almost all their emphasis away from AIDS prevention, which they still have a good program on, but they're reshifting their focus to women empowerment. And other organizations do that too. And the other thing I've learned through my own personal experience, as well as from my observations of literature, is that when technology and cultures collide, technology prevails, cultures change. Cultures always adapt new technologies if they're advantageous. I'm going to set this down so I'm not moving away. That was a good catch. Attribute that to the caffeine. Okay. And those folks aren't coming from around here. Those extra 2 billion people who are coming to dinner in the next 40 years, they're coming from less developed regions. And this is why Walmart, of course, is moving to less developed regions, South Africa, Central and South America, China, because that's where the new customers are. Same-store sales are flatlined in the United States and declining over a period of 8 or 10 consecutive quarters. It's time to start looking for growth elsewhere because your economic prosperity is dependent upon what? Increased sales, increased consumption. Here's the other issue Stefan et al. Have described. We call this the Great Acceleration. We are now entering the Anthropocene. You think of the Pleistocene, the other eras. We are now in the Anthropocene. Probably started somewhere in the 1600s, modern agriculture. So, but the Anthropocene is a period of human domination of the biosphere. Since 1950, you can't see from that here, but over here, this next to the last line is 1950. Atmospheric carbon, atmospheric nitrate, atmospheric methane, great climates, great floods, northern hemisphere average temperatures, ozone, ocean ecosystem decline, frequency of ecological impact, coastal zone structures, coastal zone biochemistry, global biodiversity decreasing, impacts on biodiversity, domestication or land use changes, terrestrial ecosystem loss of tropical rainforest. All those changes look the same as the population curve. All those changes look the same. It's no surprise because they're driven by the same thing. Now, what that means is, think about the top. We're in a period right now where we are trying to perform triage on these things to save what we can, because in 100 years, we'll have some breathing room. And what we've saved in the next 100 years will be available for the next generation. Again, I'm preaching to the choir, I know this. Again, there are a whole number of other things you can look at: damming of rivers, urban population, paper consumption, numbers of McDonald's restaurants, right? So the number of these metrics you can look at. That's what I want to get at, is this whole point of metrics. The whole point of metrics and measurement. Data explosion is also the next big thing. Let me tell you, the amount of data that we're generating is outrageous. It's unimaginable, and it's hard to communicate the rate of growth of data. So the guy who started Facebook, is that Elon Musk? No, Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg made a presentation in 2005, and he said that as all the knowledge generated from the first cave paintings and scrapings on clay tablets, all the information that humanity developed from that first time to 2003, we reproduced from January 1, 2003 to January 1, 2005. Reproduced it. How long does it take us to reproduce all that knowledge now? 63 days. Information, it's not knowledge, it's just information.
Right.
It's mostly meaningless data. It's what websites did I look at today. It's where did I make my phone call from? You know, the standard stuff that the federal government's collecting on you. But the point is, we're generating that much information. What that means is it's hard to sort stuff out. Well, this is all the digital part. Mm-hmm. It's hard to sort it out. If you're in business today and you're not managing your data systems, you're not going to be in business very long. Think about trying to manage a global supply chain, trying to sort out signal from noise. How many of you guys struggle with that in your businesses? None of you? I'd say that's one of the things I spend a lot of time on. So we all know about the people, profit, planet model for sustainability. And what we're trying to do is find that sweet spot in between. That means we have to understand all three, and that's a hard thing to do too. And one of the challenges we always have is we try to eat this elephant in one bite, and it's impossible. So, choir, what I'm suggesting we learn to do is to talk simply about what we're talking about with sustainability, and stop talking about it in big, broad, sweeping terms like I have today. It's important for us to understand that and to be able to communicate why it matters, but the real thing that matters to the human domination of the earth, sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. So we still have this, 43% of Earth's surface is used by agriculture, so there's not much land left. What the real message is, why do we care about sustainability? It's good for business. I work in food systems. That's the part of the supply chain that my expertise is in. When I talk with any CEO, any corporate leader, I start out with sustainability isn't ideological. It's all about economics and self-interest. It's good business practice. If you're not thinking about it in those terms, you're not thinking about it correctly. If you're thinking about it ideologically, you're going to miss the proper signals, and you're probably going to alienate and make mistakes. I see a lot of ideological movements in sustainability. It's treated almost like a religion. I encourage you to avoid that temptation. It's easy to become passionate about these things. I certainly am. But you have to put this in terms that people can make economically sensible decisions about. So the food supply chain, from production to consumption, I talk about safety, security, stability of the supply chain. So it's safety, security, and stability. It's not about sustainability. The S words I use are different. Why does that matter? Well, Lee Scott, 2 CEOs ago now, from Dave McMillan and then Mike Duke. So Lee Scott's two CEOs ago at Walmart said in one of his milestone meetings, he said, it's just bad for business to kill your customers with your products. They were having problems with melamine and China and sourcing of other problems. Safety, security, and stability drive sustainability. You need to understand your supply chain for that reason. So I work with a number of initiatives, Field to Market, Food and Ag Organization, United Nations, Stewardship Index for Specialty Crops, United Nations Foundation, Sustainability Consortium here in Arizona State, of course, and retailers, as well as supply chain folks. And what they say universally is the issue is trust. They're concerned about consumer attitudes, social license, freedom to operate. Agricultural producers are concerned about this. Mining operations are concerned about this. Foresters are concerned about this. Everyone in business is concerned about this freedom to operate social license issue. Criteria for legitimacy, which drives that, market competitiveness, and really what it comes down to is reputational risk. If you do something that damages the reputation of your brand, you're done, because everybody knows everything now. And sometimes they know stuff that's not true, which makes it doubly hard. So you have to manage not only the reality, you also have to manage the myth, which makes it hard. I work with the Center for Food Integrity, and their evaluation of consumer trust issues suggests that it's not about what you know, it's about what you believe. That determines whether you can convince people. And if you've been following politics, you know that's true anyway. Shared values drive our ability to engender trust. People need to understand where we come from and what we believe in order for them to believe what we say. That's a hard thing to get across, and that's why it's important not to engage people in an ideological level when you talk about sustainability, Choir. Why? Because if your ideology is not the same as theirs, you have just broken trust. But if you start at a point we all agree, prosperity is good for everybody. We all need to be prosperous. Profitability of the company is not a bad thing. Then you started at a place where you have agreement. Sustainability is good for business. Building confidence through shared values, competency, you better know what you're talking about, and influential others to build trust, social license, freedom to operate. So that's a process. Now, when I work with sustainability, I'm about done with my prepared comments here, but when I work with folks in sustainability in business, I make it clear that sustainability is just continuous improvement, which we've been at for the better part of 10,000 years since we started mapping plant. But we have a formal process of continuous improvement that really is about 50 years old, that started out of the Industrial Revolution of Japan post-World War II, and then emerged into U.S. industries. We call it total quality management. How many of you have heard of TQM? Right? There are a number of mechanisms we've used here where you define, measure, and implement. And it's iterative. Define sustainability for the enterprise. Define key performance indicators. Select the metrics for those key performance indicators. Key performance indicators is stuff you care about. We'll talk about that in just a moment. You benchmark those things. Say, where are we? Ask the question, where are we, and measure that. You set goals. Say, we're here. We want to either get better or get better, depending on whether getting better is up or down. And we want to develop strategies to meet those goals, and we report those to the public to build trust. When we implement the strategy, we measure, assess, and report to reinforce trust, and we adapt strategies to improve outcomes. This is the process I'm working with across the board. You guys are welcome to these slides. You can email me if you want them, matlock@uark.edu. So this process is easy for just about anyone in industry to understand, because this is just common continuous improvement. The difference is our key performance indicators are not just on the factory floor anymore. They're upstream and downstream of the factory floor. Why is that?
Well, you're looking at a macro thing,
Yes.
the whole world.
Why?
Garbage in, garbage out.
As part of that, it's control. Remember, safety, stability, and security of your product. Safety, security of your supply chain. If you're dependent upon a product that happens to come out of Kurdistan, and that's the only place it comes from, and suddenly there's armed rebellion in the streets, and you don't know that suddenly you're not going to get that product anymore, you're in trouble. So understanding the global market, understanding where stuff comes from is important. If you're sourcing materials from, if you're sourcing palm oil for your, and you're only using a portion of it for your Little Debbie snack cakes, and I'm not picking on Little Debbie, so let's say you're doing that, and suddenly you find out that your palm oil is coming from Borneo, and the palm plantations in Borneo that are going in so fast they're eradicating orangutan habitat at an exponential rate, and that your company is going to be associated with, very soon, with the eradication of a big, charismatic megafauna. You're not going to like that. You don't want to be the company that killed the orangutan. Reputational risk, right? So that's why you gotta know where stuff comes from. And this is the language we can talk about that makes sense. And even if you're a city administrator, there is some relevancy here to your sourcing. At the university, we're concerned about our sourcing process too. Let's talk about setting goals. Just a minute. This is just a little bit of Business 101. This actually comes from the Marine School of, what's the Marine Leadership School. Mike Johnson always reminds me, I can't remember. But this is a military construct of how you set goals, and it's pretty commonly used in most business strategies too. Aspirational, strategic, tactical, and operational goals. Right? So the difference in those is aspirational goals are stuff you want to accomplish. Strategic goals are that, you know, you big landmark, this is where we're headed goals. Strategic goals are the things that are sort of within our control that we can actually measure. Tactical are the things you do on the ground, and operational are the decisions you make every day. This is vision, this is management. Long-term, short-term goals. It's important to differentiate those when you're going through this process, because what we often do is put all these in one bucket and call it a sustainability plan. And it makes no sense. Sustainability plans should stay here, and implementation should be here. And the implementation should reside with the people who make the decisions every day, and understand, as long as they understand the strategic and aspirational goals, they can, and they have good understandings of the metrics, they can make better decisions every day to achieve these goals. And this is the way you bring people on board who otherwise don't get what you're doing. This is why the decisions you make every day, whether you're sourcing toilet paper or air conditioning, this is why those decisions can start to matter. As long as you understand the whole process, then you can start making decisions, and sometimes the strategic goals aren't going to influence your decision, but sometimes they will. Defining those. Now, key performance indicators should be outcomes-based, science-driven, technology-neutral, and transparent. Why should they be those things? Because they have to matter, they have to be real, they have to connect to the things you care about. What I usually do, I had the opportunity to go to Africa last April, and I went on a photo safari. First time I had ever had that experience. It was an emotional experience that changed my life. So we sat and watched this. We drove up to the river, a little river area in South Africa, and we saw down about over here, we saw this river riparian zone, and there's some trees. This looks like West Texas scrub, right? So there's some trees down here. And there were about 6 giraffes and about 20 zebras and a half dozen gazelle. And this giraffe, she's a big pregnant mother giraffe, suddenly stuck her head up and started walking our way, not towards us. And the zebras and the gazelles went the other way. They didn't follow her. They saw her coming and they went the other way. Why? What did she see? Danger. So she's sensible for danger. Did they have to see the danger too? No. She's a key performance indicator. She's a good enough measure to make a decision. And that's what you got to find. What are the things that are good enough to make a decision? Because sometimes, if you have to get down to that direct metric, what is it she's seeing, is too late. Because let me tell you, the thing she's seeing isn't a threat to her, but it's a threat to the zebras and the gazelles, and that's why they hang out with her. It's because she's their sentinel, right? So what do they? There in the picture. What does she see?
A lion?
Yeah, where?
Over there.
Over there.
Where she's
Over
looking,
there.
yeah.
They're hard to see. This, I'm cheating a little bit because it's so small.
Oh, it's...
All right. Let's escape. Here we go. There they are.
Oh.
So they were there all along. There are 5 of them there, and they're young males. And this pregnant mother giraffe stared them down. These young males here are too stupid to know not to go after a giraffe because they're young males. They were interested. Look at them. They were interested. Their ears are poked up. There's one right here, and there's one over here too. They were interested, but she stood there and stared them down, and they got up and left. That's the power of women. So